Hello and welcome. This is Social Studies, Voices Across America. I'm Bill Wood.
And I am still Peter Goldsmith.
Still, Peter, that's not his first name, people. That's
my initial, still.
S. Peter Goldsmith. There you go.
Correct. Correct.
Today, a personality you might remember forever, David Silver. He's produced public television programs, Beatles documentaries, concert films with Bruce Springsteen, the Doobie Brothers, and Carly Simon. And he was a senior executive at Warner Brothers and Polygram. That's just the first paragraph of a page bio. Before we go any further, welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
The most important thing, the most significant thing in David's bio, and the biggest credit, in my estimation, is that he's a friend of Peter.
Well, you know, Bill, truthfully, he is one of my good friends, and I'm really honored and proud to have David as one of my close friends. He's a wonderful guy. All the stuff he's done is fine. It's good. He's old, so he's done a lot of crap. But he happens to be a wonderful, deeply spiritual, important human being. So I'm delighted that we have him on the air.
Well, thank you very much.
David, how do you answer all of that? We've loaded it on you, partner. How do you answer?
Whoa. Yes, you have. But, you know, it's always good to be loaded with good material rather than abject dislike and criticism. You know?
David, let me start off by talking about something that you and I have spoken about periodically. And it is that although we think of ourselves as when we first met some 25 or whatever years ago, and we were younger and more flippant and so forth and so on, we have now become the elders, and we now have responsibilities to pass on what we know. And to do that is an everyday job. Do you agree? How do you deal with that stuff in your world?
Such a good question. Well, I'm not as conscious of that as I should be, I think. In other words, I really don't think in those terms that much. I know that it's right, and certainly in interpersonal things with younger people, I try and, deliver to them something they may not know, in a mentor kind of situation, even if it's unofficial. But in terms of my work, I don't know. It seems to me that the most passing on that I do is personal. However, of course, when you make something and people see that you never meet, you affect them. And therefore, the responsibility of what's in the programming, what's in the book, what's in the is enormous. I don't know whether I feel it back, but I know that, and this is going to sound so self-righteous, but I have avoided my whole life getting involved in any productions that I myself would not want to see or my children to see. And that's left me out of a lot of media, as it has you. And we've both done, things that are very revolutionary. And Bill, I assure you, Peter is always a free thinker when it comes to production, and yet incredibly well disciplined, and make sure that people work with him are disciplined. But he's new; he thinks anew all the time. I do too. So, in terms of the next generations, I really avoid this thing about the 60s and the 70s being some kind of pinnacle of consciousness or awareness, because I personally think that it was just the beginning. Mm-hmm. And despite the difficult situations we're in now, politically and nationally, I don't think anyone would deny that this is a really strange time we're in. Despite that, I noticed that young people are so much more involved in serious matters, be it the environment, be it morality, be it healthcare, be it yoga, be it spirituality. And I'm not happy with this recent dichotomy between religion and spirituality. It's such a hard cast thing. I don't buy that, because I frequently, in Manhattan, as you know, there are many churches and synagogues. And even though I'm not a traditionally religious person, I go into them. And I meditate better in those spaces than anywhere in the world. And so I've also sort of noticed that religion itself is changing. I mean, organized religion is changing, even though people constantly say it isn't. It is. It's adapting in its own way, and I think there's a place for it, because I was very, sort of in the '60s, I was so arrogant about this and saying, well, I'm a meditator and I do yoga and I do mind-altering substances and so forth, and they give me some sense of the transcendental.
Yeah.
What does your church do, your synagogue or your mosque? Well, since then I've mellowed considerably, because I know they do a lot for a lot of people. And yesterday I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Oklahoma who's a very traditional Christian, even though his family is Russian Orthodox church now. They are wonderful, amazing, hip, compassionate, smart people, and they're dedicated to their church. So who am I to say, oh, that's not as good as, quote, spirituality? It's part and parcel of the same kind of search. So to go back to your question, I ramble a bit. I think that, I just went for a walk with this guy who's in my building, and I don't really know him. And I've never really had more than 2 words with him. And we walked for how long it takes to walk 5 miles through the woods. We talked the entire time, which is rare for me. But I just wanted to get to know him, and he wanted to get to know him. And it was just fantastic to be talking about things that he had no idea about. And he, back at me, he does marathons. He does Ironman things. He's an athlete. And I'm the furthest away from that. I walk, I do lots of things, but I'm an athlete, no. And it was so interesting to swap kind of revelatory or even epiphanies about what those things bring to you. And he's a much younger man than me. He's probably 37, half my age. And it was interesting that in an hour or however long it took, I now know more than I did, before. And he knows a lot about me that he didn't know, just anecdotally, I enjoy this stuff. I enjoy the breaching of silence amongst individuals who don't talk to each other. And I talk to a lot of young people. I just do. Talk to a lot of old people. I talk to animals. But, I love kind of, like, it's amazing to me that a person who's in his mid-20s suddenly will break out with a brilliant analysis of Jimi Hendrix. It's like, wow, he died, almost a major part of half a century ago, or half a century ago.
Yeah.
And yet this young person knows everything about him. Also, a lot of young people know about, Dr. King, and they know this stuff. We think they don't, but the ones that care to, and it's always like that, isn't it, in human history? The ones that care to know about things that were valuable to us and are equivalently valuable to them. And that I find to be miraculous. Because, was I that involved in loving politicians or people from the 1920s? Of course not. I had no concept of that. So I think that's an evolution. And despite a lot of mayhem in the world now, and a lot of violence and a lot of division and the outbreak of sort of organized hatred, despite that, I think the world is in a much better place than it has been.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it's well said. But I think what I think is important to realize for those of us who are making work, and when I say making work, I'm talking about being in a creative field, whether it's dance or music or painting or writing or commercial Broadway or experimental film, or whatever it may be. I think that there is a place in our psyche that decides what the work should contain, not the message it may give, because that's not our problem. Our problem is, does the work contain something which will push the boat forward? Does it express a universality? Does it express a camaraderie, a community? And I think that goes into a lot of the work, even the work that is labeled non-political. Perfect example of that is Mr. Robert Zimmerman, who claims that he is not at all political. We're talking about Bob Dylan, obviously, if you don't know. Dylan always says he's not political, but Dylan is certainly political in almost every sense of the word. We can just start with Blowing in the Wind and leave that alone after everything else. So I think that's imbued in what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I know you're serious about your work, as I am, as is Bill. to really produce something. And I think we're all fortunate enough that monetary gain is a secondary or even a tertiary elaboration in the work at this point in our lives. We've all, thank goodness, got a home and a food on our table and so forth and so on. But for right now, I think that's what I was getting at with elders. We elders are trying to produce work that is important to us and hopefully is important to those out there listening.
Well, I think that's what you just said was the most succinct description of the actuality rather than the aspiration. Yeah. Because, for instance, I did all that work with Bob Marley, and I was so honored to be a friend of his and to be around him for years and meet him dozens of times. It was a thrill because I admired him more than anyone, certainly more than any musician, by far. Wow. Because he was an entirely spiritualized gentleman and had zero interest in fame, and very little interest in money. And, what an example he was to me. And so I was so happy to work with him, and I considered it to be a life work and still do. I wasn't preoccupied when I was doing it about any future sort of existence for this, because it was hard enough to get it done in any case. But now I can't even tell you how many people ask me questions if they know that I did that work. And I'm able to supply answers via the footage, but also by my direct experience, because direct experience is the only one I can really,
Right.
I mean,
sure.
Apart from mystical and spiritual and iconic belief, which I do subscribe to, but in terms of what I've actually seen, so with Bob Marley, I saw an exemplar for myself, and yet it was a friendship. Very much. We laughed together, we joked, he insulted me, he punched me in the chest, he did all kinds of stuff. But at the same time, I knew at the time this is the best thing I could be doing. I earned no money, not a single penny. I did, between Earl and I, we did 17 videos with Bob. But I didn't want money, because these Jamaican gentlemen, who were some of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life, had no money. And when Bob first started, he wasn't, it wasn't like he was a superstar with mansions and everything. I went to his house several times. He lived in a modest house in Kingston. He drove a BMW, and he told me the only reason he drove a BMW was because of the letters BMW, Bob Marley and the Wailers. And I was sitting on his silver BMW one time when he pointed this out to me. He was very much of a rascal and a joking guy. Now, when I think of it now, I think to myself, wow, how fortunate and blessed I was to be around a man like him. Because I could have gone my whole life without ever being around anyone like him. But he was a world leader in his own way. Because I was around him during the Zimbabwe Southern Rhodesia thing. And having grown up in England, I knew that Southern Rhodesia had to be independent. It was getting crazy, because the leadership in Southern Rhodesia was, to say it was casual is giving it more credit. They really didn't care about the native population. And when they were liberated on Independence Day, Prince Charles was there and Bob Marley was there. And Bob, I believe, sang War and one other song. I could be wrong about that. Now, when that happened, and before that too, Bob Marley was an icon to tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. After that, it grew again exponentially, because Africa became a place which was a real demographic for Bob Marley. And it should have been, of course, but there was no guarantee that it would be. And then I saw this change whereby you couldn't go anywhere with him because he was such a hugely famous person. And he never had bodyguards. I'm rambling on about Bob Marley because when I was working on it, I just considered myself incredibly fortunate and didn't really aspire to it. It just fell my way, which makes me understand that mysterious are the ways of Jehovah. Mysterious are the ways of the real core of reality. We think we understand it.
Right.
And some of us get glimpses of it.
Right.
But sometimes. But my God, if anybody said to me, you're going to work with Paul McCartney, Bob Marley, Bruce Springsteen, all these people, I would have laughed at them. I would have left them because I had no way in there. I had no idea of doing it. They were just people, you know, I didn't. So I guess I'm guiding this answer towards the idea that I just work here. And I don't exactly know what the job is sometimes, but I know it's a job.
No, but I think that's right, David. And, you know, Marcel Duchamp has said that the painting is only completed when the viewer sees the painting. So I think it's the same way, obviously painting metaphor for the piece of artwork, whatever it happens to be. It's only completed when somebody else comes in on it.
Absolutely.
Somebody else takes ownership of it. And that's where I was going, asking you, what would you want to leave? And I'm not being specific, or you can be. You know, as the work you do, and we've all done it, the three of us have done it for 40 years, you'd like to be able to say, hey, you know what? That was some good work. And if I can change one mind. I produced talk shows, as you know, for years, and you did. And you and I are friends, so I'll probably laugh when I say this. But you did one of the greatest talk shows ever on PBS coming out of Boston, because basically what it was, I was doing performance art at the time in front of an audience of usually between 4 and 11 people a night. And 11 is stretching, it would be 4 and 7 people, where you were doing a very similar thing in front of an enormous PBS audience, which was phenomenal to me, phenomenal. And I didn't know about it until many years into our friendship. Matter of fact, I read a book which talks about it, and I was like, really? But my point here is, you've taken so much in by doing a talk show and dealing with people on that kind of level all the time. There's so much input that what you give out has to be partially not tainted really, but colored by what you're taking in. And I think when we make work today, that's what I'm hoping, that I can give out something that someone else can take in. Because good art for me makes me want to make art. If I read a poem that I love, I want to write a poem. If I see a photograph I love, I want to take a photograph and stuff. I don't think that with a painting, because I can't paint it all. But if I see a film, I want to make a film. It's that kind of feeling. I think that's what spreads the goodness around. That's what spreads the message around. And I'm now becoming more conscious of that as I make work, because I'm no longer demanded upon to produce work on a daily basis as I did on a talk show, or as I did when producing films or producing things. You were under a tight schedule and you had to do what you had to do. But now I have more leisure time to work harder, but to imbue it with more of who I am and want to share at this point in my life.
Okay, I understood. And you know, because we talk all the time, that I'm in the same space in a way. Mm-hmm. And they're all different, but in my situation, yes, I'm doing a film right now about an Indian mystic and going to finish it. Heaven knows where it's going to go. It's been paid for. I got paid for it, so pay the rent. But I have no idea who's going to see it. And at best, people in the choir will see it probably, because only people who are interested in yoga and so forth will probably get to see it. So, but that's okay. That's in fact, that's great. That's narrow casting in the real good sense of the word. A narrow audience that is intensely involved in something, and then you give them something. It has to be good, or they know no, this is not real. So that's one aspect of it. The other one is that, you know, I am writing a book, and in the book it's an anecdotal direct experience book with unspoken, shall we say, moral or even spiritual, ethical, or even just psychological sort of pointers within the thing. I'll give you an example. When I came to America, I fast became aware of a gentleman named William F. Buckley Jr. And I saw him as my enemy. He was on television. I didn't know him, but I saw him all the time on the Sunday talk shows and so forth. He was very articulate, and I just sort of thought, well, this is the seed of the problem. You know, right-wing, Goldwater Republican. He created Reagan. He told me that he actually was the person that put Reagan on the map, and it's true, he was. So I then suddenly, you know, Firing Line became a PBS commodity, and I was asked to interview Bill on my own show, and I was shocked. You know, I was really shocked that they'd asked me to do this. because I was a bit of a rebel, and really we were miles apart. And the day of the show, unfortunately, the day before, I was in London. We were fogged in, and so I didn't get to Boston until about 3 hours before showtime, which was live with William F. Buckley. And when I got there, I'd contracted the flu sometime in the previous 3 days and was really feeling horrible. You do with a flu. It's not cancer, it's not anything serious, but it can make you feel like horrible. And so he arrived, and Hartford Gunn, who was the head of WGBH at the time, suggested that me and him get to know each other a little bit in the green room at GBH. And so this tall, elegant, but silent man came into the green room with me, and someone shut the door, And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Silver, you're clearly not well." And I was sneezing and coughing, and I said, "Okay, yes. So, the expenditure of energy when you're sick can make you far more sick." I said, "Yes, yes." And he said, "So, I'm happy to go back to the car in the parking lot of GBH, fly back to New York City, and we can do this some other time." And I said, oh, no, we probably can't. And he said, well, I said, I don't know. I just have an instinctive feeling that we're not going to do that. He said, well, it's not because of me, Mr. Silver. I said, okay. So you're saying that I should go home and go to bed? He said, indeed. I said, let's do the show. And you know how it is. Rod Stewart once said, the singer, somebody said to him, your life is just heaven. Girls, money, fame, rock, and everything. He said, no, I'm totally depressed all the time, except when I'm on stage. Yeah. And then I'm exhilarated. The energy comes shooting from heaven, and I can do anything, even if I'm on the verge of death. So that's how I felt about Bill Buckley. So we did the show. We argued. I reprimanded him because of his mediocre attitude towards things that meant a lot to me, like the Beatles, Allen Ginsberg. And then we started correspondence. And he was not a friend, but an amazing person to know. And he said to me, my group, our enemy is probably communism, and second is socialism. He said, but you are a young British socialist with brains. And I enjoy the colloquy, and I absolutely would like to stay in your orbit, and you can stay in mine. And we did, we corresponded. Okay, the reason I brought that up was because it was an example of not really knowing someone and hating them, of not knowing that essence of this man. And subsequently, his sons, Christopher, and I believe his brother, James, have often said that when my father was with you, you felt always so good because he paid attention, he showed incredible empathy, and he was genuinely interested in everything you had to say. Not me specifically, but anybody.
I had a similar incident with Bill Buckley. He came on a show that I produced, and I was all set to go, okay, I have 3 pages of notes, and I'm going to so forth and so on. And I met him and his son, Christopher, in the green room, and we spent 45 minutes discussing celestial navigation, which they were expert at, as you know, and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean celestially. And after that, I adored him and always was fond of him and thought, you know what? This is what makes politics fun. This is a guy who has very different opinions and ideas than I do, but he can base them on intelligent fact, and he can discuss them at length.
Yes.
And that's where what the Greeks call disputatio arises from. And we can.
What's that word, Peter? What's that word?
Yeah.
Oh, disputatio. Okay.
Are you questioning my New York accent as opposed to your accent?
I am not. I am ignorant of the word.
By the way, Mr. Wood, would you like to get involved in this thing at all? Because you were the one who had some very good ideas. If you leave us to our own devices, we'll go forever.
Yeah, come on, Bill. Hit me with some.
You mentioned
with your best shot.
Bart, and I'm saying, well, this doesn't matter until I step in. So, talking with David Silver, writer, producer, has done everything. And there's people say that, but he has. He's done a documentary with the Beatles. He's done concerts, 17 videos with Bob Marley. But I want to go back, David, to something you mentioned at the very beginning. And that just resonated to me to no end. And that was so many people in our audience tend to think of the 60s as enlightenment. And you said it was the beginning, which means that now we're approaching a level on the curve that, could be the beginning or the middle. Hope it's not the end. But let's talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of where we wanted to go when we wanted to talk to you about music and movies that are now reaching back to the 60s to bring that to the modern day.
Yeah. My first sort of thought about that is that in the 60s, I was actually a TV host. So I had, I wasn't really, wearing beads and tie-dye and all that, and was not really a hippie, but I attracted them to my show. They were all crazed for my show, particularly BU and Harvard and all those places in Boston where I emanated from. And I have to say that even though we were hipper to some of the hidden truths of the society, of politics, of humanity than the previous generation that seemed to be asleep, understandably so, having gone through a world war and enormous suffering and all over the world and a terrible trauma to get out of. I mean, 60 million people or more died in World War II in the worst of imaginable ways. And America in the 50s was truly asleep, it seemed to me. So when I came around, and I was still in England, and the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan happened, basically that's where it was at, and of course Ray Charles, Otis Redding, and all the great bluesmen, because I'm a blues fanatic and have chased bluesmen all over the world my whole life. That to me was what was going on in America, and it was incredibly fascinating to me because it wasn't going on in England before the Beatles happened, which was kind of a miracle, actually. No one's quite been able to explain it. Even me in my film, I didn't really. So at that time, it was so enjoyable, so viscerally enjoyable, intellectually challenging, that it seemed like a revolution, at least in the way people think. It was enjoyable. There was a community about it everywhere. You could go to San Francisco and feel you could talk to people in the street, just like in the Village in New York or in Cambridge Common in Cambridge. However, the kind of thing that is now happening amongst people of the age I was then is far more focused. They are producing people who know what we sensed. In other words, I went to at least 6 meetings at MIT in the 60s about the greenhouse effect, is what we called it. And these professors and students were incredibly aware of what was going on even then in terms of carbon emissions and also in terms of sustainable energy production and distribution. And we knew about it, but virtually nothing ever got done. It was always great conversations, provocative confrontations, and the best music that ever existed. Now, I see that as being, and I'm not a Pollyannish person. In fact, I'm usually rather a pessimistic kind of person. I see what's going on and I think, oh my God, this is, what's going on in Washington, elsewhere. I think, oh God, we've slid into a kind of proto-fascist, cruel, mean, Me Too, horrendous collective consciousness. That's one side of it. The other side of it is people I meet all the time who are actually involved in groups. I mean, how many yoga studios are there in America now? In 1966, there were probably 11. Now there must be at least 40 or 50,000.
Yeah.
And even though the music ain't so great now, in my opinion, that's just my opinion, there are at least, they say, 75,000 bands in America. Kids now, they know how to do that. They saw their mentors and they know, and it's so much easier. You can put an album together in your front room with GarageBand with a decent set of mics, you can do it. Whereas, back then you could never record an album. You had to be discovered and then nurtured to record an album. Now you can do it like that. We can communicate to anyone, anywhere, instantaneously. That obviously has its drawbacks, as we've seen recently. However, that component, or that, shall we say, that vehicle for communication, the multi-dimensional vehicle that is now communication, instant, everywhere, has enabled people to find like-minded people to actually create change.
Well, yeah. We now have, for the first time in the history of man, a truly democratic media, in the sense that any person in the world, any person can walk into a place, if he doesn't or she doesn't have it already at home, get on a computer and blog. And should that blog be something wonderful and terrific, it will virally go across the world, and that person will get her or his thoughts out and known. We've never had that kind of access to media before, ever. As you say, in the day, it was a big production. You and I did a show together with a band called the Baja Men, where we traveled into the Caribbean, and we made a documentary about their making of their second album. And it was a long process. You just said garage band. This was days and days and days of being in a studio and having to have a good deal of money to do this. Whereas today, money is not an issue. I mean, it is in a certain sense, but it isn't really. You can go into the local library and get online free of charge, and almost any place in the United States. I'm sure there are places in the world where you can't. But basically, in the civilized world as we know it, you can. And I think that's very different.
David, thank you. Your time is valuable. You've shared it generously. And I know I've learned that you and Peter talk all the time, and you probably shared some of the same things that you shared today, but I've learned enormously. Thank you. And I hope that our time will allow us to come back together again.
Nothing I'd like more, because it's very enjoyable. There's just something really enjoyable about this. And I do quite a few podcasts actually here and there. And there's space on this one. There's actual space. You can feel it. There's not, there's no agenda except to try and make it communicative. I feel that, Bill. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Peter?
Yeah, Bill, it's true that David and I do speak often. But the only thing is, we have no memory, neither one of us. So we have no idea what we've said to each other or not said to each other. So we probably have said it 3 or 4 different times.
Yes, it gets reborn every day. Thank you, both of you. I really love doing this.
Thank you, David. Pleasure. Even though we're good friends, thank you. I appreciate it. Really, I do.
Thank you.
Until the next time, take care of each other and respect each other. We'll have David back again.
Yeah.
Peace.
You can get this podcast. You can tell someone else about this podcast. It's available through YouTube, through iTunes, and through Google Play. Let's hear from you. Let us know what you think so that we can be in community with you. And there is a way to contact us. That's at peter@AgnitusLife.com or bill@AgnitusLife.com. That's our email addresses. Let's hear from you. Let's open up the forum.